of construction that we can do in America during prime construction season, and I would just suggest that we take just these two species and set them out just for the transportation purposes here. And with that, I yield back.
If the gentleman would yield.
Yes, I'd be honored to yield.
Before he yields back, I understand the gentleman is concerned, and I'm prepared to accept the amendment. I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose is the gentleman from Massachusetts seeking recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
This is a peculiar amendment, it seems to me. The enforcement of the migratory bird law, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, is administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Department of Interior, and so it's not there's no enforcement power in the Department of Transportation. Are there agreements by which the DOT and the Department of the Interior are bound?
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Yes. Actually, in 2001, the President did Executive Order 13586. That executive order extended that out to all agencies dealing with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So it does extend this out to the Department of Transportation as well as all our agencies. Now, if they're going to prosecute, obviously it's going to be the Department of Justice, and the rules are going to be promulgated out of Fish and Wildlife. But all agencies are affected by it based on the executive order from 2001. So we're just trying to take this for the transportation only because it is such an issue for much of the transportation across the entire country.
And this was an executive order promulgated by President Clinton or by President Bush?
By President Clinton at the very end, early January 2001. January the 10th, actually.
Well, I don't know how this amendment is going to solve the problem that you have, but exactly. But the gentleman, the chairman, has agreed to adopt it. So I will state an objection because I really don't understand how this is going to solve your problem. But I will not go beyond that.
Thank you, gentleman.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek?
I would like unanimous consent to ask for a call of the yeas and nays on that.
Is the gentleman asking for a recorded vote?
A recorded vote, yes.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Denham of California.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very simple amendment that just basically says at the end of this bill, none of the funds may be used for high-speed rail in California. California has a project that was supposed to cost $33 billion. The voters in California voted for bonds of $9.9 billion. The federal government was supposed to come up with $10 billion, and a private company was supposed to come up with $10 billion. Problem is, there is no private investor for the $10 billion. The federal government is broke with $16 trillion of the debt and can't come up with $10 billion. And the state of California can no longer float the bonds because the credit rating is so bad. To compound the matters, it's no longer a $33 billion project. It ballooned to $68 billion, then on up to $98 billion. And when talking to Secretary LaHood, he said there's no end in sight, that this is a project that could continue to change as we move forward. In fact, that's what we're actually seeing in California, an initiative that bounces back and forth, $10 billion here, $10 billion there. So again, this amendment is very simple. It just says None of these funds can be used for high-speed rail. In California, we've got highways that are falling apart, bridges that are falling apart. We need to ensure that our gas tax dollars get used for their intended purpose of actually improving our roads and highways. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I'm claiming time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, there are no funds made available in this Act for high-speed rail. None. And so since this is a one-year bill, I don't think this amendment does very much. The gentleman from California has a problem where the process has been going on now for at least a decade in the development of high-speed rail program, and the people of California have spoken on this by referendum. They have passed a bond bill by referendum. I think bond bills usually take an extraordinary vote, two-thirds vote or something like that. Am I correct? Would the gentleman from California confirm that it was a two-thirds vote by which the referendum was passed?
Sir, you are correct, and now the voters are two-thirds against the bill by several different polls.
Well, that can be established if they actually have a referendum that repeals what they have done. But there has been, as we know, California has received about $4 billion of monies from the federal government from earlier funds in earlier bills, which have already been obligated and or are about to be obligated. And this actions on this bill would not have anything to do with the obligation of those funds, would not be in effect at any time that could affect the obligation of those funds, because they have to be obligated before the end of this fiscal year, where this bill is not certainly going to be in place before the end of the fiscal year. But there are processes also going on. Unfortunately, we have at the moment no one here who's really knowledgeable precisely about what it is that's going on in California. But let me just comment here that the proposal for the starting use of these funds has been controversial. There are people who say, well, why are we building this in the Central Valley of California? Because the first intended construction of the project has been in the Bakersfield to Fresno corridor, and then if it is extended, it is then likely to be extended to the Modesto metropolitan area or the Stockton and/or, I think it is at Modesto that there is a bifurcation, the one link of it going to then to Stockton and to Sacramento, and the other going to San Jose and San Francisco. And in either case, you have to start somewhere. When we started to build the interstate highway system, we didn't start in the center of the cities, which would have been very complicated. We started in building those legs of the interstate highway system where it was easy to build them, and that is possible. And it's the right-of-way, I think, has already been acquired by the California DOT to build the high-speed rail system in that first corridor, in the Bakersfield, Fresno, and maybe on to Modesto, as I have understood the developments in the last few weeks as they go on. So the gentleman's problem is, it seems to me, with what's already been agreed to by California and what is already going forward, monies that have some of them been obligated and in place to go, and some of them yet to be obligated, but about to be obligated, and I will.
No dispute here on whether or not this bill has any mention of high-speed rail. I would agree. There is no mention of it. And I won't even dispute here tonight whether the President wants to spend more on high-speed rail or whether the Governor wants to spend more money on high-speed rail. That is a different debate.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Madam Chairwoman, I will then move to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I think I'm doing the correct thing there. And I'll yield again for the continuation of what the gentleman from California is saying.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for yielding. I would agree that the President can come up with more money if he feels that he wants to transfer more stimulus dollars, or we may have another vote, depending on another allocation or appropriation that may want to spend money on high-speed rail. This amendment says that our gas tax dollars will go back to California to be used for highways and roads. And that's all this amendment does. That's all I intend to do, is to make sure that the Governor of California does not take money out of the block grant from the federal government that goes into the STIP funds to utilize it for other things such as high-speed rail. The Governor has to use the money where this federal government intends it to be used. Very simple.
The language of the amendment, reclaiming my time, the language of the amendment, as I have it before me, says none of the funds made available by this act may be used for high-speed rail in the state of California or for the California High-Speed Rail Authority.
Correct.
How does that guarantee that California's gas tax monies will not be used for high-speed rail?
If in this bill, as Congress, we stipulate that none of the funds can be used for high-speed rail, then none of the funds can be used for high-speed rail. I mean, it's a very simple mandate for the Governor. Use the money where it was intended to use, but not high-speed rail. I mean, the language is very simple. That's why we wrote it as a one-sentence, none of the funds may be used for high-speed rail.
Oh, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Madam Chairman, yes.
Is it your impression that what the gentleman is saying is that they can't take highway trust fund money, put it in the high-speed rail, they can't take transit dollars, put it into high-speed rail? I believe it would be my understanding, since there's no money in the bill for high-speed rail, that he is talking about other pots of money that would go to California and just trying to wall that off from being used. That's my understanding. Maybe the gentleman has a different interpretation.
At this point, I really don't know whether your understanding is anywhere close to mine. So I think this is an amendment deserving opposition, and so I'm opposing the amendment. I think this amendment should not be adopted, and you can do as you wish.
Does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Go ahead.
Ask for a recorded vote.
No.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section, none of the funds made available by this act may be used to promulgate or implement any regulations that would mandate global positioning system tracking, electronic onboard recording devices, or event data recorders in passenger or commercial motor vehicles.
Does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I do, and I thank the Madam Chairman. I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
A point of order is reserved. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I'm honored to be joined by my distinguished colleagues, Ranking Member Mr. Ray Hall, Mr. Hunzinger, Mr. Tom Graves, and Ms. Herrera Butler on this amendment. Our bipartisan amendment prohibits any funds under this act to be used to implement any administration mandate for global positioning systems, electronic onboard recorders, or event data recording devices on both passenger and commercial vehicles. Madam Chairman, the Department of Transportation has become obsessed with electronically monitoring vehicle movements. Right now, DOT is working on a mandate which would require every car have a device which is very similar to an airplane's black box. Additionally, they are working on another mandate which would require that trucks carry an electronic onboard recorder. Even the name sounds scary. These devices would record and transmit data when the truck is in use. This regulation is so costly that even President Obama has singled it out as a regulation which needs more studying. He did so because it is estimated that the mandate will cost the trucking industry at least $1 billion to implement. Madam Chairman, the truckers in my district cannot afford this cost. I know some companies like these devices, and that's great. They can put them in their trucks voluntarily. However, just because a few companies like the devices, we should not mandate them on everyone. And for this reason, I hope the House will adopt this common sense amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman may not reserve
I
the
yield back.
balance of his time.
I yield.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I would withdraw my reservation.
The
for the point of
reservation
order.
is withdrawn.
And I appreciate very much the gentleman's concern on this amendment. I think its timing is maybe unfortunate. This is a major issue in the reauthorization bill that hopefully is going to be filed tonight. This issue will be dealt with. It truly is an authorizing issue that should not be on this bill. And so while I may have share some concerns with the gentleman, certainly I don't think it's appropriate on this bill, especially with at this moment when the highway bill is being filed, and hopefully this issue will be resolved in that bill. So with that, I'm going to have to, with some reservation, urge a no vote on this amendment, unfortunately.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I think that what the chairman has said is probably about as good as one can get. What we have now is an amended version, a slightly amended version of the proposal. And my understanding is that the major long-distance trucking companies are against this language. Most of the safety advocates are against this language, but there are other trucking or interests that favor this language or are happy with this language. So you have a real controversy among people who, well, if the long-distance truckers and safety advocates, I would generally think that that was something we should worry about. But as the chairman has said, this is an issue that really ought to be in the hands of authorizers and worked out by the authorizers, and that may or may not be dealt with in the authorization legislation. But in any case, the limitation on funds is effective in any case only for this one-year appropriation bill. Yes, I will.
You know, I have heard from some of my colleagues in outside groups who would argue that this is not the time to have this debate. But if not now, when? When will we publicly debate the issue? We're waiting on a conference report that we know not what's in it. And so this is a time, I would argue that this is a time for us to have that debate and to be clear. And just because a few big companies in this country want these types of devices, then what about the small business owners out there who everyone on both sides of this aisle, continually come to this mic and propose that they support, while our actions of opposing this amendment would say to the big corporations, I'm with you, and the little guys, I'm not.
Well, who then, if claiming my time, maybe the gentleman understands, and I simply do not, who is in favor of promulgating regulations, who is about to promulgate regulations in this area of mandating global positioning systems, electronic onboard recording devices, and so forth. Where is the action to do that here? Where is the problem here?
In the Department, well, the gentleman,
yes?
In the Department of Transportation, it's my understanding.
Are they in the business of writing rules to require this?
Yeah, they do. They have big requirements. That's right.
My very competent staff tells me that we have been requiring this in the Mexican trucking controversy over the past few years. Well, we have been fighting over that one back and forth for years and years now, and I can't remember whether there was or wasn't that sort of thing there. I don't remember it having come up before at any point. I yield back the time. What is he going to do?
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I ask for a recorded vote on this issue.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available under this act may be used to implement any rule or regulation that expressly prohibits an owner or landlord of housing from using a criminal conviction to deny housing to an applicant for such housing.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this amendment is very limited and straightforward to deal with a problem that we've started getting a lot of calls about from realtors in our district, as I'm sure many of my colleagues across the country are receiving, as well as property owners who own apartment units, other types of housing that are rented out. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has recently come out with a rule called the Disparate Impact Rule, and it's not a final rule that's been issued yet, and we're just trying to make a narrow clarification that would allow property owners to be able to check and make sure that if somebody has a criminal conviction, that person could be prevented from moving into an apartment complex, for example, where you've got single mothers with young children. Every single day in this country, property owners use background checks to check on criminal records of people that are applying for housing. This has nothing to do with violations of Fair Housing Act. It's just a basic common practice that property owners use every day to make sure that somebody that's looking to move into housing doesn't have a criminal record. Now, some property owners can look at that. Some property owners can choose to not be concerned about that. But millions across the country, millions of property owners do look at whether or not somebody's got a criminal conviction in determining whether or not they will rent them housing. And it's not only to protect the property owner who's got, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars invested in that property, but also to protect the other residents who are renting property at that apartment. And so this new rule that's come out jeopardizes the ability for those property owners to look and make sure that somebody doesn't have a criminal conviction on their record. And so what this amendment would do would just ensure that if the Department of Housing and Urban Development goes forward with this rule, that the rule won't prevent somebody from using a tool that's been in the hands of property owners for generations just to make sure that somebody doesn't have a criminal conviction when they're moving into this housing unit that they own. Again, using an example of a sex offender. You know, there are sex offenders in most states. My state of Louisiana, there are strict requirements of what somebody has to comply with if they're a convicted sex offender. They have to register. They have to do a lot of other things. But if somebody doesn't comply with that law, and there are always cases we find of people that don't comply with that law, you don't know if you're renting property to somebody whether or not they are a convicted sex offender. But if you choose to do that background check and see if they've got that criminal conviction on their record, then you can say, wait a minute, you're not coming into my apartment complex and jeopardizing the safety of those young children that already rent from me, because we're going to make sure that if you've got that background check that shows that you're a sex offender, you're going to be denied. And yet this new rule jeopardizes their ability to carry out what is a basic enforcement mechanism that property owners all across the country use every day to protect their property. And we just want to make sure that as it relates to criminal convictions, that property owners can continue to look at that and make sure that that's something that they're not going to be found in violation of law if they use that mechanism. So, simple amendment. I would urge adoption, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Herrera Butler of Washington. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to build flood protection walls for Interstate 5 between mileposts 72-82 in Lewis County, Washington.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reason I bring this amendment to the desk is because there are families, there are businesses, moms and dads in Lewis County on I-5 that have experienced devastating flooding. In fact, one of my meetings back there, I met a wonderful older woman who's lived in that county for decades, and she said to me, "Honey, when it starts to rain outside, I get terrified. I don't know if I should put all my valuables in the attic and I should leave the house." And that's because in 2007, Madam Speaker, this county experienced devastating flooding. And every time it rains, the residents wonder, is this going to be the next catastrophic flood where I lose my business, I lose my home, and it devastates families. Our state legislature and locals in the community in Lewis County have been seeking a basin-wide solution to flood protection. The Army Corps of Engineers has spent decades studying this issue, and the time to study is over. We also need a solution that isn't going to wall off the twin cities in Lewis County by erecting an 11-foot or 11-mile levee that basically turns those cities into a bathtub. And with this amendment, I was seeking to prohibit that bathtub effect, so to speak, so as to protect the businesses and the families and the commerce that takes place. We can come up with a better solution. However, Madam Chairman, because this is such an important issue, and I want to make sure that we do this right, I'm going to withdraw my amendment at this time. And actually, before I do so, Madam Speaker, would it be possible to ask a question from the subcommittee chairman?
Would you yield? Would the gentlelady yield?
I would be happy to yield.
Yeah, I understand the concerns you have, and I would look forward to working with you as we get towards conference to try and address your concerns on this very, very important issue, obviously, for your constituents, and would be pleased to be of any kind of assistance we possibly could. So
absolutely.
I appreciate the gentlewoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, I withdraw my amendment, Madam Speaker, and yield back my time.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. Purpose, who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Madam Chairman, and I believe we're coming to the end here, and I just want to make a couple comments as far as the gentleman from Massachusetts. Once again, this will be his last appropriation bill on the floor as the ranking member and former chairman of this subcommittee. Mr. Olver has done an outstanding job over the years. We don't always agree on everything, do we, John? But we work very, very well together, and I just want to wish you and your wife the best. You are a great partner and someone that I admire very, very much. Your intelligence, your ability to look in detail at programs, and we kid each other, or I kid Mr. Olver a lot about maybe having debates inside his mind sometimes in committee, and but he's always extraordinarily thoughtful, and someone that I admire very, very much. Madam Chairman, we've been through a two-day process here, a lot of amendments. I believe that we're to the point where we can bring this effort to a conclusion.
Yes, we're done.
And I would again thank Mr. Olver, thank the staff, the professional staff, on both sides, on the majority, on the minority side, for doing such an outstanding job and working together. It's very difficult sometimes on these bills. Also in my office, Doug Bobbitt does such a fabulous job on working on this bill for me. But just to say thank you to everyone. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Do we have? For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa?
Madam Chairwoman, I move that the committee do now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 5972, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 5972 and has come to no resolution thereof. What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that I be removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 1380.
Without objection.
I know who it is. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to instruct conferees on H.R. 4348, offered by Ms. Hahn of California. Ms. Hahn of California moves that the managers on the part of the House at the conference on the disagreeing votes of the two houses on the Senate amendment to the bill H.R. 4348 be instructed to agree to the freight policy provisions in Section 1115, Section 33002, Section 33003, and Section 33005 of the Senate amendment.
Pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 22, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Hahn, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I consume. My motion to instruct the conferees would be in favor of the Senate language as it relates to freight and goods movement. It would authorize a national freight plan, national surface transportation and freight policy, and port infrastructure development initiative. We've all heard that the conference report is close to being filed, and I've also heard that the Senate freight provisions are not in the final agreement. I wanted to come to the floor tonight and make one last attempt to ensure that our country has a national freight policy. Madam Speaker, the Port of Los Angeles is in my backyard, and when I was on the City Council in Los Angeles, I focused on transporting the goods that arrive in the port to the rest of the nation. And when I came to Congress almost a year ago, I was surprised that there was not enough attention on our ports, and I was surprised that we didn't even have a ports caucus. So I co-founded the bipartisan Port Caucus with my good friend Ted Poe from Texas to educate the rest of our members on the importance of our ports and goods movement to our nation's economy. So first, for those who don't know what goods movement is, I'd like to talk about why it's crucial for our nation. We're a consumer economy. Whether it is a mom-and-pop store on the corner or a large retailer like Target, we don't think twice when we go to these stores to purchase groceries, toys for our children, or clothing. When we go to the store, we expect that the milk and the Barbie dolls are on the shelf. Simply goods movement is transporting products, whether they are made in America or imported through our nation's ports, to retail stores. The goods that are transported throughout the country are transported by freight rail, trucks, and in some cases waterways. The efficient transportation of these goods is crucial for our economy. We need to invest in all modes of transportation for freight, including roads, rail, grade crossings, to reduce bottlenecks. But, Madam Speaker, this nation does not focus enough resources on freight policy and goods movement. We don't have a national freight plan to guide us. According to Robert Fuentes at the Brookings Institute, the nation has no comprehensive strategy or plan for the maintenance and development of transportation assets related to international freight movement. The country's freight transportation industry is highly decentralized, with private operators owning almost all of the trucks and rails, and the public sector owning the roads, airports, and waterway rights. And unlike our international peers, such as Germany, Canada, Australia, the United States doesn't have a unified strategy that aligns disparate owners and interests around national economic objectives. Madam Speaker, without a national plan, we have bottlenecks transporting our goods. For example, the goods that leave the Port of Los Angeles take 48 hours to arrive in Chicago and take another 30 hours to travel across the city. What does this bottleneck and others like it mean? It means higher costs for consumers, more congestion, more pollution, less jobs. We need to stop this piecemeal system and develop a national plan. It's so crucial that we develop this plan now because the amount of freight will increase drastically in the next 20 years. In Southern California, it's expected to triple. In addition, this administration wants to double the exports by 2014, and I think we need to have an efficient system to export our products overseas. This will provide opportunities for our small businesses, and we need to prepare for that increase. According to the Federal Highway Administration, the U.S. Surface Transportation Network, which includes rail and highway, is reaching or has reached capacity in many areas. The congestion largely stems from the lack of capacity to meet traffic demand and lack of infrastructure. A U.S. Department of Transportation report, Freight Transportation Improvements and the Economy, estimates the cost of carrying freight on the highway system at between $25 and $200 an hour. Unexpected delays.
The gentlewoman will suspend. The gentlewoman may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Unexpected delays can increase the cost of transporting goods by 50 to 250%. Because the supply chain is a network of retailers, distributors, transporters, storage facilities, and suppliers that participate in the sale, delivery, and production of a particular product, congestion resulting in unreliable trip times and missed deliveries can have major business implications, which adds cost at every link of the supply chain. If the transportation function is efficient, manufacturing and retail firms can carry less inventory because they can rely on goods being delivered when and where they are needed. If the transportation system is congested and unreliable, a firm must carry more inventory to ensure production processes are uninterrupted and the availability of goods is maintained. Carrying inventory is not free. Not only is it a firm's capital tied up in the inventory, but it must be stored and insured. This model of business carrying more inventories to buffer transportation unreliability costs money to the companies and ultimately to the consumer. You know, one of the reasons that I like working on ports and freight policy is because it's a bipartisan issue. It's something we can find common middle ground on. For example, Bob Poole of the Libertarian Reason Foundation stated, goods movement infrastructure has not gotten enough attention in recent decades, either at the federal level or in the transportation plans of urban area, metropolitan planning organizations. The larger question before us is what the federal government direct role should be. Mr. Poole continues, despite my general decentralist leanings, I agree that facilitating free flow of commerce with the world and among states is one of the tasks the Constitution gives to the federal government. So, he says, I'm favorable to the idea of the federal government making strategic investments in critical corridors and key nodes in the goods movement system. And obviously, this needs to involve all the modes that make economic sense for shippers to move cargo. What organizations support a national freight plan? In addition to many transportation and port organizations, a national freight plan is supported by the United States Chamber of Commerce and the National Retail Federation. The Chamber of Commerce recently sent a letter this month to the conference committee stating, the reliable and timely movement of goods is critical to U.S. economic health. Unfortunately, the condition and capacity of the transportation system has failed to keep up with the growth in trade volume and freight movement. Congestion caused by bottlenecks threaten to choke future economic growth. The Chamber believes the Senate-passed bill includes strong provisions to establish a freight program that would improve regional and national freight movement by targeting investments and improvements that would demonstrably facilitate the movement of freight, such as truck-only lanes, railway-highway grade separations, improvements to freight intermodal connectors. As part of the Freight Stakeholder Coalition, the retailer stated, substantial investment in the nation's freight transportation system must be given a high priority. Without the ability to quickly and cost-effectively move goods in and out and through the United States, America will not be able to maintain our high standard of living and high employment levels. I also have letters of support from the American Trucking Association and the American Association of Port Authorities in support of this motion. And I have many other supporters. I'd be happy to read those if you would like. We also know that congestion, especially truck congestion on our highways, causes air pollution. In my part of the country, South Coast Air Quality Management District said that diesel emissions are responsible for 71% of the major pollutants in the region. This means more asthma in our children and more cancer. Eliminating congestion will help improve air quality and our nation's health. Also, America's farmers would benefit from a national freight policy. Not only do our America's farmers provide food in our grocery stores and on our tables, but they feed the world as well. America is the world's breadbasket. The U.S. is the world's top wheat exporter, and all of that grain needs to be transported from America's heartland to our ports. It is crucial that we have the infrastructure to transport our goods from California or the Midwest to export them. In conclusion, last week, the Ports Caucus met with the Transportation Secretary LaHood. He said the department was beginning to plan a national freight policy, but that Congress needed to prioritize goods movement. This is our chance. The last transportation bill was passed 7 years ago. We cannot wait another 7 years before we make a national commitment and a priority for a freight policy in this country. I urge my colleagues to vote for my motion, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise to claim the Republican time on the motion to instruct and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
This motion instructs conferees to the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Conference to agree to several provisions in the Senate bill relating to freight policy. As I'm sure you're aware, the conferees and their staffs have been working around the clock, and it is our hope to file the bipartisan bicameral agreement as soon as possible. This agreement is aimed to tackle serious issues facing the infrastructure of the United States, which is the utmost importance to the stability and future growth of the American economy. As soon as it's filed, I encourage the gentlewoman from California to review the conference report and take special note of the freight policy language that a majority of the House and majority of the Senate conferees chose to include. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, and I appreciate my colleague from California saying that, but again, I have letters of support from major organizations who felt like the freight policy language was not as good as the Senate bill, and just to make clear that the freight program, the freight policy in the Senate bill does not increase the total cost of the bill, and by leaving the provisions that I talked about out of the final bill, we're not reducing the cost of the bill and we're not reducing the deficit. I just think the Senate language really sets forth something that I think we've never done in this country, and that's really to prioritize and to understand the importance of moving forward, being competitive in this global economy, and establishing once and for all a comprehensive freight policy that will put goods movement at a level that I think it should be. I yield, or I reserve, or something.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I'm prepared to close if the gentlelady is prepared to yield back. She does.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Yes, thank you, and I'm ready to close too. The hour is late, and for those of you watching tonight on C-SPAN, it's nearing the final hour of the day. It's at past 11 p.m., but I really did feel like one of the reasons I did come to Congress was to raise the level of importance of our ports, of goods movement, of cargo, what it meant to this economy, what it means to jobs, and I just wanted to give it one last shot. That we might instruct the conferees to include what I think is the better language in the final transportation bill. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I will just close by saying I can appreciate the gentlewoman from California's passion on this issue. I, too, see the great ports of California and throughout the nation and the need to have an overall freight policy, and look forward to working with her in the future on this very important issue, and I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to instruct. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A woman from California is recognized.
Yes, I'd like to ask for the yeas and nays. Recorded vote.
The yeas and the nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas for today and for the balance of the week.
Without objection, the request is granted. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
The House today debated and voted on amendments to the Transportation and Housing